idea. Like, light bulb went off. Yes. Okay,
I love it.
That's what I had to tell you.
Okay. Hello, welcome back to the BFF podcast, the Best Foot Forward podcast. I'm Ann Duskus of Studio Duskus, and here with me is my co-host.
It's me, Vic from Cestlavic, and we're so happy to be back.
We're back!
Yes!
We're back!
It's like we're here every other week, but then it feels like we haven't recorded in a while, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump right in. I'm pretty stoked about our topic today because I think this is going to unpack a lot of stuff for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you, Vicky, what are some of the most common questions that you get in your DMs?
Pertaining to the both of us, it is, how does it feel for you to get a studio? Or questions that are like, why did you get a studio? Or should I get a studio? How do I know if I want to get a studio? And it's
like when is the right time to get a studio?
Right. Yes. And it's like all these questions that we get it in our lives as well, right?
Yeah.
When we do lives, people are like, oh, so how do you feel about getting a studio? What made you feel like you were ready to get a studio? And I feel like we've talked about it, but we haven't really fully unpacked, what it feels like. And it is going to be nearing a year since we've moved in, which is crazy. June 19th.
Wait, is it the 19th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I remember it.
It's going to be our 1 year anniversary.
Yay.
Okay, that's
Time
super
flies.
exciting. I know. Okay, so this is the perfect time to talk about this. Okay, so maybe we'll just, let me ask you, like, just right off the bat, like, how has the last year been for you, first of all?
It's been, oh my God, it doesn't feel like it's been a year.
It does not feel like it's been a year,
right?
Honestly. Yeah.
And I feel like you asking me this question, I'm like kind of stunned because what has happened in the last year? It feels like a really short amount of time, but I'm pretty sure if I go back and think, a lot of stuff has happened, right? In between when we first moved in and now. Of course, like, we've had a lot of furniture come in, We're like I think I am fully unpacked into this space. Like, I've settled in and I have all the stuff that I need. We can sit here and, create from beginning to end without having to go home and grab more stuff and bring it here. Yeah. So, I'm in a good place. What about you?
Yeah. Okay, wait, can I just say though, I think like when you're fully unpacked is when you're starting to get like sent to your office all the time, constantly.
Yeah.
And so I'm just gonna give this away real quick because I think it's funny. So like you were out last week, and then so I've been like, I think it's the same thing when I was out too. Like we were just receiving each other's packages like all the time, right? And I'm like, oh, another box, another shoe box.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this looks like shoes.
Yeah.
And then so like again, like that's often what we do is like we will like place an order online and of like a donor shoe or a shoe that we want to work on, and then we'll get them sent to the office, and then we'll receive it, but then it's always like it just feels like we're constantly shopping, but we're like not shopping for ourselves.
Oh yeah, for the business, quote unquote,
Yes,
business expenses.
So how many pairs of shoes did you get in your size for your business? But
Anne was literally like, how many pairs of shoes did you order for your collection, because they're overflowing out of your
I'm
shelves.
like, where are you putting all your stuff? Because there are a lot of shoes over there.
There are too many shoes. Yeah. No, guilty as charged.
No, but yeah. So I think that's a really great feeling when like you're no longer like bringing things from elsewhere just to like get your work done. So for me, it feels great. Like I really enjoy coming to a space, like a workspace that's dedicated to what I do. That's not a part of my house.
Yes.
So you and I kind of go back and forth about this because we both have to make a conscious effort to sort of separate ourselves from like our work and our life, and then part of us like starting our own business is this attempt to have a better work-life balance, and still working on that for me at least. But having that separation, separating like my office from my house is a really big like step forward in trying to have a better work-life balance. Because when I leave here, again, like because of the nature of what I do, all my tools and my machines are in the office.
Right.
If they're not at home, I can't physically work on any products except maybe doing like admin stuff on my computer.
Yep.
Which I, often take up like the same amount of time, because that's the back end work that's
necessary, but
it's a necessary
right.
like evil, but
yes, exactly.
Yeah, but like when I'm taking it out of my office, like I have to just like kind of sit back and like just enjoy the moment and be present with my family. So I really, really enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah. On the other flip side of that, what's the latest that you've stayed at the studio? Just out of curiosity.
The latest, I feel like you probably have stayed later than me. The latest I've stayed at the studio is probably like midnight or 1 a.m.
I have not stayed later than you.
No way.
Yeah, you
no
stayed till
way.
midnight or like 1.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Remember that project I was working on like in January that had like delivery date in like second week of January?
Yes.
And it was just like every day was like deadline.
Oh my God.
I was like, and again, like I said, I can't do the work when I'm at home. Like everything is here.
Yeah.
I
get so tired though. Like my latest, so my partner was away on a business trip, right? So I literally had no plans after work, and I could just work every single day when I came in. And I think the latest I stayed was like 9:30. So it was like maybe start at like 8 or 9 and then stayed till 9:30. I think that was the latest. And I was pooped.
Yeah.
Because like it was nonstop. It's one of your like high productivity days. Because like nobody comes in to bother you, or like you have nothing to go off to do, like no dinner afterwards or whatever. And yeah, 9:30 was my latest. Holy cow. 12.
But then I feel like for me, there's like, I mean, I love it, and I think like there is a period where like you go through like it's kind of like when you're hungry, right? Yeah. Like when you're super hungry, you're like nobody's feeding you, and you sort of like at some point get over your hunger.
Yes.
I feel like it's the same thing for me when I'm working. It's like, okay, I can sense that I'm kind of tired. Okay, like I'm not being super productive because I'm tired.
Yeah.
But then at some point I get over that hump and I'm like,
a
okay,
second wind.
I'm ready to go again. Right. So I think like I thrive on that energy a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. That's great. I'm like looking forward to the times where we can get super into our work and we have those deadlines, and I kind of, again, like you, thrive in those times where it's like, oh yes, I get to work and then take a break afterwards, or like finish a project and feel very satisfied.
Okay, so can we go back and talk about the time when we decided to sign up for a studio space together?
Yes.
And I know, again, like you said earlier, we probably have touched on this here and there. But can we just, kind of go into details as far as like how you felt like you were ready and how I felt like I was ready, and then how, again, this came to be.
Yeah. So this is kind of, we talked a little bit about this during our Meet Cute episode, right?
Yeah.
Where we met and all these things, and it kind of was like meant to be. And I think at the time, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in my memory, I think it was you that came up to me and said, hey, what do you think about a studio, or like sharing a studio space? And at the time, I had my work area that was in my apartment, my 1-bedroom apartment. It was literally in my living room space. So where my dining table would be, that's where I had my setup. And
okay, let me stop you right there real quick. Hold that thought. And so how long have you worked in that space? Let's just, I mean, even, okay, so I know because I'm your friend and I know a lot of, your background stories about like how you moved, from, this apartment to an apartment. So like you actually transitioned from like a different like apartment studio space to, a second one.
Yeah.
And so, but altogether, how long would you say you've worked from home, like from a home studio, before you even consider?
Yeah. No, I appreciate the reorganization because I'm just blabbing now. I think I was at the 1 year mark maybe, since I started social media full time.
Okay.
And so like from the pandemic to where I was at that point, and I had moved once in between. So I was at, an apartment previously that was just a studio apartment actually. So it didn't even have a bedroom. There was no there were no walls that defined which space was used for what. There's no compartmentalization. There's nothing. So it was all in the open. Then we moved to a studio where there's one bedroom, so I could take over the living room, and that was where I was at that point.
Okay, I think this is so good for our listeners to know that you can do a lot with very little. And I think you especially, I think it's so wonderful that, to some extent, we're all still very scrappy at this moment.
Yes.
But we're just like being
Always
scrappy on a different stage of our lives. But the way that you had to be scrappy, like in a studio apartment, before you can actually get a bigger space, whether or not it's for your physical work or just for like photography, which is a really big part of what you do as a creator.
Yeah. And imagine so compared to you, I think I have less physically like demanding machines that need to take up room. However, look at the shoe boxes that I have, and then like you were saying with photography, you do need a bit of space to kind of spread out, to put your lights, to have a distance between where you're shooting, a depth of field, and all those things. So it definitely was, I make do, right, with whatever we have. We do that, but yeah.
But I think that's great because again, it's like, okay, what is like, that's such a humble beginning, and like now we have more space. Now we have a space away from our house, but so you've been working from a home studio for like officially as a digital creator for like just over a year.
Yeah.
And then that's when we met. And then I like planted the seed with you. I was like, hey, what do you think about getting a studio space together?
Yeah.
And really, I will say it again, I've said this before, I think part of that came from me being a little selfish because I wanted to get a space for myself, but I wasn't in a financial position where I would be able to afford a space by myself. It's just, the nature of where we live.
Yeah.
And so the only way that I could consider getting a space, a studio space that's dedicated to work is if I shared it with someone else. And Vicky will say, and she will tell you that I am like the pickiest person and I'm like super hard to please. And so, but then like, and it's strange because at the time I've only known you for like a couple months.
Yeah.
But then I just feel like I've seen some stuff. And so in the past, so I feel like I trusted my gut. Like I knew I had a good feeling about you.
I was so flattered when you told me because I was like, from what I gathered, again, first impressions and like, we didn't know each other very well, but I was like, I have a feeling that Anne is like a very like put together, organized, like just pristine person. Like everything has to be in the right spot. And I'm like, she's willing to share a studio space with me? Like, I have to be on my A game all the time, which I am like the messiest. Currently in the studio, there is a mess going on for photography, but like I was super flattered because I'm like, oh my God, okay, well, I got to think about it because it's totally something that I have to make sure that I'm not messing up, So
you couldn't, but but so I think like so at that point when I decided to consider getting a studio. I've been working out of my home studio for maybe like a year too, actually. Yeah. And I mean,
it's like COVID blending things together.
Yeah, I think COVID sped things up a little bit for me at least. And so. And just to touch on, like, for those of you who don't know, I was working full time for someone else before COVID. And then when COVID hit, that's when I decided to start my own studio.
Yeah.
And so I think, but then, So I think like officially, like I was working out of my home studio for a year, you
Mhm.
know, doing it full time versus, but then I've always had like a little corner in my house
Mhm.
where I used it as a studio,
Yeah.
right?
You have like this cute little
like a nook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so it's like kind of like my hobby space.
Yes.
So even when I was working for somebody else, I would like on weekends and maybe sometime after work, like I would work on my own personal project,
Mhm.
you know? So
Mhm.
I always had a little studio that I can work out of. And then, but it wasn't until the pandemic started that I started working on this full time.
Yeah.
And then so it was, yeah, I would say it was comparable. Like it was like a year into it, and I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I need more space for machines. I
Yeah.
need potentially a space to host students in person, you
Mhm.
know, to teach a class. And so that's when I felt like I needed a physical space
Yeah.
in order to grow my
Mhm.
business.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So were you getting I know you were teaching courses online. Then it sort of felt like the next logical step for you would be to have in-person classes, right? And so like that was the natural progression for you. It's like you started getting all these signs that was like, okay, this is not enough space. I need to grow in this aspect, right? That's
Yeah, and I think the sign was really clear. You know, the signs were just my students taking online classes with me, asking if I would teach a class in person.
right.
You know, and I live in the suburbs, and
Mhm.
it's not a destination by any means.
Yeah.
You know, so and also like I feel like, you know, obviously the idealistically, I would want to host people that I know if I were to bring them in to do a like in-person class
Yeah.
at my house.
Yeah.
But I know that's not always going to be the case, and I don't want to host a stranger in my house. To me, that's
I
a little
remember us
odd,
talking about
you know?
this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, and
and
people knowing, and of course the nature of our business being online and getting people to come to our business or come to our website and whatever from online.
yeah,
It's a little bit sketchy to have
Yeah.
people come over and know exactly where you live.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was like kind of tough for me. And so I think that was one of the deciding factors of why I needed to get a physical space.
Mhm.
Because, you know, like, and I think, you know, at the time when you and I had talked about potentially getting a space together, you know, I think you and I were both making like a pros and cons list, you know, as requested by our loved ones, like
Yes.
why we need a physical space.
Budgeting, pros and cons,
Right.
like projections, what our goals are, what we expect to have in terms of ROI and be able to pay for
Right. How do we pay for
overhead.
our rent? Exactly. Yes. And yeah, because we're going from like having no overhead to this like an overhead that we're committing to for like a year at least,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so I think I think like a lot of the pros would really focus on like for me, like again, having a physical space to host students in person.
Mhm.
Because I think at the end of the day, if I'm being really honest with myself, you know, like could I have continued to do all the work that I'm doing today
Mhm.
at my house? I can probably make it work.
Probably.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I can probably make it work. But then again, I think it's just like then it's like the revisiting of the topic of like, okay, what's my work-life balance like? You know, because before when I was working from my home studio, like I would go eat dinner and then I would go right back
and
to
come
work.
back. Yes.
I'm sure did you experience the same
I
thing? Yeah.
I could do more late nights.
Yeah.
Where I would just sit there and go and go and go, and I don't have to worry about time.
Yeah.
Whereas here, I'm like, oh, what time is it? I should probably go home. I should probably have dinner.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, I didn't have that sense of urgency of
Right.
having to go home.
Because bathroom's right there. You can take a shower whenever.
Yep,
Bed is
exactly.
right in the next room.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
you can
Easily
crash
go
on the couch.
take a power nap, wake up, and then power
Yeah.
through the night again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there is just a lot of like, you know, different factors to consider.
Yeah.
When I was ready to consider like getting a space,
Mhm.
physical space,
Mhm.
and also like another reason for me that I was considering getting a space is I was running out of room in the little nook that I was calling my studio.
Yeah.
And I think if any of you are curious, you can scroll down on my grid and you can see a photo of my home studio of what that looks like and how it was just like started to become like a little bit like
on Instagram,
overrun.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
it was still like a very organized chaos, but it was just like you can tell it's running out of room.
Yeah.
And I'm also one of those people that like, again, what a privilege to even say this. Like, I cannot work in like a clutter environment.
Yeah.
And so when there's just a lot of like crap laying around, like visually, it really distracts me.
Yeah.
And so, so I think I was running out of room. I needed a physical space to host students, and everything else I think is a nice to have. You know, like the space that we're in right now allows us to have more space for photography.
Yeah.
Allows us to be together to film this podcast. You know, because like, what else will we have done? Like, we would do it in our kitchen, right? Like, if we're filming
somebody's
podcast.
place, right? Try to find any empty spot we can and just set up there,
right? Which again, we can be scrappy. We've done it before. We can do it again, you know. But I think, what is the natural progression for the next step in our business? Yeah.
Can I? Okay, so let me chime in here.
Yes, please.
Now thinking back to that time, I don't think I was as ready to commit to a studio at the time that you had brought it up. My first instinct was actually, we had a really long phone conversation, I remember. And my first instinct was like, nah, that would be so expensive. Like, you know, I would have to pay rent in addition to the rent for my apartment every single month. We live in a very expensive city, and that's going to be additional overhead. It's going to be an additional, like something that I have to be concerned about for my business, right? Like, it's not like my business was like raking in tons of money at the time, and not even now, you know, we're kind of still making ends meet. And so I was more hesitant at the time. And then we had this conversation, and I had some time to kind of sit on it. And when we were doing the whole pros and cons thing, and we were convincing, you know, our partners why it was a good idea, I think it really just pushed everything over in terms of like, how serious are you about your business? You know, whereas like, oh, it can be very low risk for me if I keep it at home.
Yeah.
It can be this like really conservative investment of time and commitment of time and potential that you can make this business into if you just kept it at home. Right? It was very reserved. It was very much like me in my old ways being like, it's too much of a risk. Like, I'm scared to like really go gung-ho in my business. And I think the aspect of having a studio is what pushed it overboard, if that makes sense. You know? Like,
oh, this is so good. Like, getting out of your comfort zone.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it was like, I struggled a little bit because I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, how much longer is this gonna be a thing, right? Yeah, okay, COVID, everybody was interested in sneakers and customizing, and there's this like a bit of a boom and increase in interest, but how long can I do this? And it was all these like concerns, all these things I was worried about. And then when I like looked deep down, I was like, do I really want to take that next step? You know, do I want to make this an official space? Do I want to have a spot where, because I always thought, you know, if you paint, technically for the decade that I had been painting on the side, it was just a table, some paints, some paintbrushes. Like, what else do you need, right? I didn't need a lot of room. So I kept thinking about it. And of course, like, wanting to expand your business, you got to do photography. I have to create content, you know, be able to film in like so many different areas that we can film in the studio. And slowly, I think all of the pros started stacking up when I was open to the idea of it.
Yeah.
Right. When you first called me, I was like, I don't know. And I think you could tell that there was a bit of hesitation. You're like, you know, if it's like a money thing, then we can work that out. And I was like, no. I have to know if I'm like 100% in this in order to not resent anything or, you know?
Yep.
And so, yeah, it totally was being open to the idea and entertaining what the possibilities are of getting a studio at the time.
That's really good to know, because I think, but I think it was great that you were hesitant, because I think part of that is like this own like self-convincing that you have to go through without somebody else trying to convince you otherwise. Sure, like I can have some influence, but then hopefully like I did a decent job of making you feel like, okay, really no pressure. Like I just want to throw it out there if that's something that you would want to consider.
Oh yeah, no, you were great. You were like it's okay if it's a no, right? That was always the first thing that you said, and that's why I had to really feel like this was the decision that I was happy about, right? Not influenced by you, not influenced by my partner, not influenced by whatever expectations that I have, but like this is something that I really wanted to pursue. And at the end of the day, it's like, damn, maybe this experience of having a studio, and it's really low commitment actually to begin with, because we were entertaining 6 months.
Yeah.
At the start.
That was what we signed.
Right.
Yeah.
We like signed a contract. Okay, we're gonna try this for 6 months. Let's see what happens. If it is a complete like flop, then we'll go back into our little holes in our homes.
Yeah.
Right. And it luckily wasn't. But so the commitment was still relatively low. And I think being able to share a studio space, again, financially the commitment is a lot lower than, that. And when you're starting a business, we have the luxury of the internet and social media, where a lot of times you can sell services or products without having a storefront. But traditionally, if you wanted to start a business, it'd be like, okay, now I have to take out a loan. I have to, invest in a storefront and then stock up with merchandise, inventory, right? And when I thought about that, I was like, that's true. I don't have that kind of overhead. This is really just a space where we can have our factory, like we can start creating, we can have our studio where we can start making things in a more convenient way and separate our work and our lives.
Okay, so let's address two things. So I think it's great that initially you felt, for lack of a better word, like uncomfortable with the idea of getting a space, because I think your initial like knee-jerk reaction was, can I afford it financially?
Yes.
And I think that's such a good like question to ask, because I mean, I feel like that's what like a responsible person like you would immediately think about, because it's like, how does this add to my monthly expenses?
Yeah.
And so I think, for our listeners who for people who comes to us and ask us like when and how is a good time to get a studio space, that's definitely one big thing to consider. It's like, financially, how much runway do you have,
right,
in your savings and whatever income that you have, in addition to your current life situation? Is it 6 months? Is it 1 year? Because I think for us, we've had to accept that like we are not going to have a consistent income for the next year or two. Can we realistically still share this expense? And so we had to work that out. But like, what does it look like for someone who money is not an issue? Like when do you, I know we can't really speak about that because money is the issue, but like, what can we just kind of play that out? Like, what does it look like if, like someone has the money to get a studio? Like, when is a good time for them to get a studio, do you think? If they've been like, same situation as us, they've been working at home and like, what does that look like?
A good question. And you sort of alluded to that when I was like, what were the signs that you were seeing in your own home studio space that pushed you to wanting to look into getting a studio? And I think it's when you see things like, oh, I don't have enough space to work, or it would be really beneficial for my business if I had this dedicated space to do so and so. For example, set up a photo corner, where I can just take, and if it's not possible to do that in your garage, or there are obstacles in you setting it up where you already are, then I think it's good to also look into it. I think, again, there's no harm. You don't have to commit to signing a contract for a studio. But if you start getting these signs and you're like, oh, I want to look into it, go and check out spaces. And there's like such a huge range. Like, Ann did all the research, granted. So thank you so much. But she
thanks.
like opened my eyes to like how many, there are studio spaces where you can get a whole room like we do. We kind of have a like a closed off space to ourselves. There are also smaller studios where one person should occupy that space. There's also the possibility of renting just a table, a workbench in a shared space, right? So there's so many levels and like, I guess, ranges of how you want to take this. And whether it's like a graduated procedure process where you like start small and then go bigger, or you're ready to just jump in and say, okay, I want my own space. I want to make it look this way.
Yeah.
Also just depends on financially how you
Thank you so much for pointing that out, because I think that's really important, because I think like a lot of the idea of getting a studio, it's almost like shopping for a car or like looking for an apartment. Like you have this idea in your head, and you have this ideal in your head.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the reality is a big drop off from this ideal like situation that you have in your head. Yeah. So I think it was so like good for us to like go look at the different spaces that we can potentially be in, and then like look at the price range of these studio spaces and like realistically what can we afford, and that suits our needs specifically. And even like the people who rents the space, like the landlord potentially, I think all of that sort of like, in hindsight, now that I'm like thinking about it and talking about it, like it's helped us made a decision like more holistically.
Yeah, totally contributes to the whole experience.
Yeah. And I think like the space that we're in right now, like we'll tell our listeners right now, it's like this space was above our budget. Okay, that's what we'll say.
Yeah.
But I think it was one of, and I think like we would not have considered it had we not like meet the rest of the people in this building. Yeah. Had we not seen the resources that would be available to us in this building. Yeah. And again, we're girls. Yeah. So safety is a big thing for us. Yeah. And so I think it's just a combination of everything, where even though this place was above our budget, it made sense for us when we're willing to kind of take the extra step to invest in ourselves and our business. Yeah. And so I think, again, to your point, I think it's so important to just kind of explore this idea of like, okay, I want to get a studio space in my neighborhood, in my area. What does that look like? Yeah. Because I think that helped us make a decision.
Yeah. And like being able to see another studio space. Do you remember
the other
one? It was like you get a section of this area that wasn't walled off or anything.
It's like open concept.
Right. You're right. And then when we went in to meet the people, they were like, oh, by the way, this guy, he doesn't like it when, you talk very loudly on the phone. Or
we freaking use I use hammers like all the time.
We're just hammering away or like making noises, or I'm filming and talking, and that already was a red flag. Yeah. And then getting access to space. So like you can always look into like WeWorks, for example, but then there's like a shared access to like conference rooms and things like that. That wasn't even easy in that space that we saw. You had to, there was like a booking system, and you were limited to very little time, and then everything was extra, right?
Yeah,
you had to pay extra
nickel
for
and
it.
Diming you.
Yes. Whereas like here, it's like, yes, we are mostly in our studio, but if we needed to, we could use more of the resources outside, and that's like totally, now in hindsight, such a huge perk.
Oh my gosh, yeah, such a perk. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so, okay, now I want to ask you, what is like one of the best things that have come out of having a studio that maybe you didn't even think about or consider?
I mean, honestly, this podcast is one for sure. Because I
don't think this would have happened or it would have been a lot harder.
It probably, I mean, I think it still would have happened, because I think, again, we're used to being scrappy. So if there's a will, there's a way. Okay. But I think it wouldn't be the way that we wanted it. Not to say that this is exactly the way that we want it, but this is so great for us at this moment in time, and we love it. Yeah. Sure, I love to have a dedicated like audio room where everything's padded down and like sound is super focused, right? You know, that would be great. But then at the same time, this works great too. Yeah. And so I think like podcast is definitely one of those things where like that came out of this, experience for me. That's huge. And then also, secondly, like being able to meet clients in person.
Yeah.
In a workspace. I feel like that's so special to me personally, because I think, as a designer and putting myself in my client's shoes, I think it's so great to be able to bring them into my world and show them the process of their shoe getting made, and I think that's so special. And I don't, in this day and age when everything is online, I think having this physical space to be present with the work itself, for someone else, I think that's been really great for me. Yeah.
Especially like the nature of your work with all of the leathers and the textures and colors.
Yeah.
You can't really send an email and expect a client to be able to know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
In terms of setting expectations, and like, I'm kind of tooting our horn a little bit. How many times has somebody come into our space and just been like, like it almost like lights up, and it almost inspires more creativity in the people that come by our space too.
Yeah.
And I think that makes me very happy, especially for clients. It's like they come in, they're like, oh, okay, this is where
an
it's
actual
made.
studio.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think, adds so much more to the experience
Totally.
itself.
So what else for you? Like, what's one of the best things that came out of this experience for you?
I think, surprisingly, it's the people.
Yeah.
Right? Because I am very much like a self-proclaimed like introvert, where I don't really necessarily need to socialize with people all the time. But being in the studio and showing up, like, we've made so many friends and we're able to like just share ideas, and like it's so fascinating to see like what Ann's doing on the other side of the studio, and it almost like builds this momentum as you work too, because you're seeing other people work around you. Whereas I think back in the day when I was still working in my apartment, the momentum would kind of like slow down, and it would be up to you to kind of like pull yourself together. Come on, you got to do this.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas here, it's like very natural. Everything, you see things working, you hear the noises, like, of it being busy and the hustle and bustle. That makes me very happy coming in all the time.
Yeah. I love that. And can I just say too, and I think like, for our listeners who are considering getting their own space, maybe they're by themselves. Again, I think we're very lucky that we have found each other, that there's at least you and I, regardless of who else is in this building.
Yeah.
But so I think like, if you're by yourself and you're looking for a studio space, I think the discipline is the same, whether you're at home or you're at your own studio. Like, you need to be self-driven and self-motivated. But then like having someone else in the studio is so great for me personally. And I will like go on record and say there are times when I'm just like being lazy.
Yeah.
But then the moment you see somebody else doing work, you're like, oh my God, like
Right.
I am falling behind. I'm like, she's making me look bad. I need to step up my game.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's been super helpful as far as like getting motivation,
Yeah.
to like get your ish together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think this is I want to say that the two of us have this mental deadline, not deadline, I don't want to say deadline, but there is a date, our goal for when we feel like we can assess what we've done in the studio. I mean, looking back now, it's been a year and it's crazy.
I know.
The amount of like things that have come out of this studio are insane, right? But we also have that timeline where it's like, okay, in another year or so, when however long our contract is at this studio space, we're going to come back and assess, like, is it worth it? Do we continue to get a studio, right? It's not just like we've signed off 10 years of our lives and we're going to be paying for studio rent for 10 years. It's like very like year by year kind of a process where you look back, you're like, okay, is it still worth it?
Yeah.
Should I still be putting in this overhead? And when you do look back, it's like, yeah, it is, to get these clients in, to have like meetings. We have this like center conference table where people can come in and just chill and chat.
I know, and have lunch. Oh, I love that. It's my favorite. Yeah.
And just, like friendships, relationships, and like being inspired and motivated and by creative people and all the people that like come through that are, you know, people that we love or we respect and invite them into our studio has been such a blessing and such an experience in its own, you know?
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. Yay! 1 year.
Happy
Anniversary.
Happy anniversary. I'm so happy. Thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for being with us today.
Yes.
We really enjoyed having you hang out with us.
Yes, thank you so much. Stay tuned for the next episode, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Peace.
Bye!
Oh, we gotta feel our arms flailing.
What was that dance move that you did?
We're like, oh my god, that's terrible. Please.
Oh, that might not appear
Oh
in the bloopers. That's too
terrible.
bad.
Okay, all right.
10 seconds,
Okay.
right?